Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing very well. In this video, I will show you how to create backgrounds for cards using stencils and ink. These are such fun tools to use and they are easy to use as well. So here are the 3 stencils that I will be using today. You can use anything that you have. I like detailed stencils. Stencils are quite commonly available at any crafting store, or if you're in Pretoria, South Africa, something like Gymnets or Shop and Scrap, it's an online store. Then I will also be using Distress Oxide inks. I will explain how they work, and I will also demonstrate the difference between the original distressed ink and the Distress Oxide inks. There is quite a difference. Then you will also need some makeup brushes, or any kind of brush or sponge that you have to apply the ink onto the paper. These work wonderfully for me. I have a brush for every color scheme so that the colors don't mix. So let's start. I'm taking my stencil and placing it over the cardstock. Then I'm using some washi tape, or you can use sellotape, to just hold everything in place so that it doesn't move, and you will see that it gives a nice and crisp effect. I'm using the makeup brush as well as the Distress Oxide ink, and I'm applying the ink onto the stencil. So notice that I'm moving my hand in circular motions. I'm starting off the stencil onto the table and then moving my way over. As you can see, my brush was a little bit reddish. So yeah, the background is red and orange, but it works, it blends nicely. And now for the most satisfying part when stenciling, peeling that stencil off and seeing your end result. Right, next up I'm going to use some craft paper, not white paper, crafting paper. It's quite commonly available, as well as some white pigment ink. So it's not Distress Oxide, it's pigment ink. You can use any white pigment ink that you can find. So there's a difference between dye ink and pigment ink. So the pigment ink is quite saturated. So when you apply it onto your paper, be careful that that ink doesn't go underneath the stencil and ruins your project. So just keep the stencil still and go in with the ink and the makeup brush in circular motions. When your stencil shifts, don't worry, just find its place again, line it up and continue. So there you can see our white against our crafting background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that stencil and shift it up just above the white stenciling that we just did. You will see it will form like a little crafting border just above or just beneath the white background that we created. Again, I'm just adding some washing tape to hold it in place, and I'm coming in with some pink and purple Distress Oxide ink, and again applying that onto the paper, moving my hands in circular motions, and there you can see the end result, and it gives a great dimension, that whiteboard. Using different techniques with the same stencil gives you varied results and you get a lot more out of your stencils. In this next card, I used distressed ink, the original, and not the Distress Oxide ink. I used a different stencil and some plain white cardstock, just as I did previously, again using a makeup brush to apply it in exactly the same way. But as you can see, the distressed ink gives a bit more of a weathered, old and vintage look than the crispness of the Distress Oxide ink, and that is the main difference between the two. The Distress Oxide ink for me personally blends easier because it has a pigment undertone, but both work wonderfully. It just gives different results. So for the last example, we are going to do partial stenciling. So sometimes we don't have a stencil like the one on the left that covers the whole background, but we have a smaller stencil and you still want to use it to create a background. So all that you do is you take about 3/4 of that stencil, place it onto the cardstock, and then you create this partial, modern, exciting backgrounds. I really like this technique. You can get a lot out of your stencils. I'm coming in with some yellow Distress Oxide ink, And there we have a whole new different feel, and it's all done by using a stencil and some Distress Oxide ink. As easy as that. Next up, I'm trimming my cardstocks to fit onto my cards. I'm using a little gelatine as always. This works wonderfully for me. I'm just eyeballing it. There's no precise measurements that I use. It just has to fit onto my card. Righto, so I went ahead off screen and I created little elements and figurines that I can place onto these backgrounds. I did some stamping and Copic coloring. I also die cut a butterfly as well as a rose and some circles and rectangles that I can use to form my cards. I'm adding all of my little elements onto my cards using double-sided tape, and I just want to show you how easy it is to create cards when you have created a stencil background, because all of the beauty and the detail of the card is in the background, so you don't want to cover it up with all of these elements and flowers and whatnot. You just want a little element to place the focus and finish your card, and that is the miraculous thing about stencil backgrounds. I have my 4 white cards and I'm adding all of my backgrounds with some double-sided tape onto my cards. So I like finishing the card on a separate piece of cardstock, make it done, finish it, everything, and then at the very end add it to my card. That way the card stays clean, it doesn't have all of these marks on it, and it just gives a professional final look. I'm finishing my cards by adding some Nuvo drops in the colors of the cards. There are different kinds of Nuvo drops. You get the originals and then you get the jewel drops. They are my favorite. And you also have this matte Nuvo drops. If you're unable to find Nuvo drops, you can use beads, you can use gems, you can use almost anything. You can use glitter glue. This just really finishes a card off for me. It pulls everything in the card together. It almost connects the background with the element that you added, but it's totally optional. I like doing it. You will see me doing it in almost all of my videos. There are our 4 finished stencil background cards. I hope you enjoyed the video, and remember to be creative and create something beautiful today.